wobbly just a little bit. I wonder whether that's due to popularity. People have been using the tool more.
Good good sign.
Um, Stressing the servers. Anyway, we're live, everybody. Welcome to Brainfood Live on Air, bringing it to you every Friday, no fail, episode 320. 320. How many years is that? I don't know, 5, 6 years, something like this. We've been going every week relentlessly, only a few breaks for us. And the reason why, because this is not work, folks. This is great fun to have conversations with smart people about stuff we care about in the world of recruiting, HR, and the rest of it. So we're going to keep rolling this forward as long as we can. Brilliant to have everyone here on the show. Firstly, before we do anything further, let's make sure that audio and visual is fine. Folks, can you hear and see myself and David Wilkins on screen? Let me know whether you can see that. And if you can hear me okay, do let me know whether that's fine as well. Drop a comment in the chat there if you're watching this on Crowdcast. Now, we are live streaming this, I believe, in multiple LinkedIns, so I can see my own LinkedIn firing away there. I do believe, David, you're also live streaming this, as well as Rob Walker and some other folks, Bob Pulver as well. If you're watching this on any of those LinkedIns, do let me know whether the audio and visual is fine there as well. Just drop a comment into the comment thread. Okay, we seem to be getting some okay. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Great to see everybody. Juliana, always cloudy in Sao Paulo. Why is this? Okay, let's get on with the show. Folks, we are talking about a topic I really wanted to, I've been wanting to get this conversation going for such a long time because it was so obvious with the advent of artificial intelligence that it would have just this huge impact on how we thought about the numbers of people and the types of people and the types of skills that we need in organizations. How does it impact the planning part of it? We always talk about we need to be better at strategic workforce planning. That's all well and good. But what does AI do? It kind of completely rocks the boat in terms of what that means. So no better person than David Wilkins to join us on this today. So David, why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you or what it is you do?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Hung. Dave Wilkins. I am the Chief Product and Strategy Officer at TalentNeuron. Just for quick background, TalentNeuron does labor market intelligence on a global scale, so similar to companies like Lightcast or Horsefly. We also do talent intelligence, understanding what's going on inside your company. So we can do a skills intelligence, job architecture, strategic workforce planning, which is a key focus for the business, as well as talent marketplace solutions. So we're really trying to bring together sort of that comprehensive view of internal, talent insights and expertise, but also an external view of what's going in the labor market to fuel better strategic workforce planning. By way of background for me, I've been in the HCM space for 30 years, all the way back to the first LMS with Knowledge Planet, Taleo, Oracle. So this is a little bit of a dream job for me to be pulling all this together in the way you're talking about.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. I've just shared David's LinkedIn URL in the chat stream there. Make sure you go and connect and follow David there. Super interesting topic. Folks, let's actually, before we kick off, I nearly forgot, we've got to thank our sponsors, by the way. Every single week, this show is sponsored by technology companies that want to make sure we stay on air. And this week, our sponsor is I guess one of themselves been on the news recently. It is, of course, Ashby ATS. Congratulations on everybody at Ashby for their raise, Series D raise. I think only 4 or 5 days or so ago. They're a company that's really been a little bit of a rocket ship in the ATS space. I think there's not a conversation being taken place with the letters ATS, and Ashby is not following very closely behind. So they are the disruptive force in the ATS sector today. Do check them out if you're looking to upgrade to a next gen system. Probably you need to take a look at what these guys are up to. Just share the link in the chat stream there. Okay, David, quick question for you to start off with. Do you have access to the sort of customer demand information that comes at you to TalentNeuron services? Because I assume that might give us some indication as to what companies are thinking about. Like, is there a particular service line that seems to be getting more attention? Are there particular reasons why companies are coming to you? Like, what have you gleaned from the conversations and the information that you're getting from the customer base of TalentNeuron?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hung. So, we've been sort of starting this journey down this road of SWP since our acquisition of HR Forecast in October. Um, what I would say is interest in the normal labor market intelligence side of our business remains strong. It's remained consistent since that acquisition. It's still a key interest area for people analytics folks, people in TA to understand the shape of the labor market. But what's been remarkable is the explosion in interest around what I would think of as SWP topics. Our pipeline has grown almost $50 million in less than 6 months in that particular category. And a big subcomponentry within that is trying to understand automation potential, the impacts of AI on workforce planning. Another big one that's coming up a lot, which is a related topic, is talent benchmarking or baselining. How are my skills internally? How do those compare to my competitors? How do they compare to market? Often a secondary or corollary question within that is, what are my competitors doing with AI? Where are they investing in AI? Right. So it almost comes back to AI again, which is sort of interesting. And then just more broadly, this generalized notion of just we have to get better at understanding what our future talent needs are going to look like, and then how we go from where we are today to anticipate where we're going to have supply gaps in the future, and then how many of those should be filled by bot, how many of those should be a buy, how many of those should be a build, how do I borrow, how do I think about org redesign. All of those really meaty questions are coming up more and more frequently for us.
I love the four B's, David. Let's repeat that to the
Yeah.
audience. So you got to buy. So buy means buying what talent or buying the tech.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
buying in this case talent, buying the talent. Yeah, yeah,
Buying the talents, that's recruitment.
yeah.
Bot, like, is it like, is it, and that's a buy or build sort of conversation. You might want to buy that, or you borrow it, I guess, if it's a SaaS bot. Do you build it? I guess that's an internal build of of the bot solution. And or do you, what was the the fourth thing,
So,
David? Borrow, was
so
it?
yeah, yeah. So the way we break it down, Hung, is we think about buying talent from the market, building talent internally, where and how you can, borrowing talent, like contingency, contract work, that type of thing. Botting talent, right? So going toward automation, AI, industrial automation with robots and things like that, right? And then we also introduce a category of break, which is the notion of job redesign, org redesign, right? What's interesting though is the flavor that you just put on it, I think, is also starting to emerge and is going to be a central question over the next few years. Are you going to build your own bots? Are you going to borrow bots? Are you going to buy bots? Like that whole nomenclature also applies to what you're doing with automation as well. So I think it's a good framework to sort of think about, what are we going to organically invest in? What are we going to organically get? What are we going to rent effectively? And then what are we just going to push toward automation entirely?
Yeah, yeah, very, very good. And it's. I think it's promising that at least those inquiries are happening, right? So I guess companies are cognizant of the changes afoot. They're not ignorant of it. I do think we've kind of like phase shifted from
Yeah.
the denialism phase. Maybe there was a 12-month, 18-month period of denialism. But
Yeah.
now it's like, okay, it's here. The iteration rate in terms of performance of artificial intelligence seems to be spinning faster, in which case it's like,
Mhm.
okay, we need to really plan for this, because I guess the imperative of the business is that you have to be competitive. Like you can imagine that a company that is AI, fully and AI enabled, is going to just outcompete those that are, I guess, human only. Fair to say, David?
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% agree with that. We just completed a really interesting research piece with one of our partners, Roland Berger. They're a major consultancy in Europe. Together, we did an analysis of the customer service field and the potential impacts that AI is going to have. One of the first things we found is that something like 90% of the work being done is already being mediated or augmented in some way by some level of AI, with increasingly moves toward more and more sophisticated client interactions being driven by AI. When you model that out forward, we think by the end of 2027, so just 2 years from now, that around 30 to 34% of customer service jobs are probably going to go away because they're going to be replaced by AI. So you're starting to see, and I think it's going to happen in pockets, Hung, where there are certain kinds of tasks and certain kinds of roles that are more or less susceptible to AI displacement, or even more broadly, automation displacement, including robotics, including business process automation. It's not just Gen AI. There's actually multiple forces going on simultaneously, and some kinds of roles, because of the nature of the tasks that are performed, just lend themselves to a faster displacement. So I think we're going to see it in pockets. Customer service is one obvious place. I think in recruiting, you're starting to see a lot of companies invest in agentic AI related to like screening and conversational AI with a candidate to speed up the process and have more interactions with more potential candidates. That's another obvious place where AI could be really disruptive. But yeah, I think we're going to see some very profound changes in the way the work is performed inside of businesses. I don't know if you saw, but World Economic Forum in Q1 did a whole skills report. One of the more fascinating findings they had is that by 2030, about 15% of the work that's currently being done by humans will be displaced and will be done by automation. That's a pretty big displacement in 5 years or so. 15% of
Yeah,
total global work. That's a lot.
that that's right. And I think you know what, there's accelerants to this trend. I think because of the global economic environment being at lower growth, meaning higher
Yeah.
pressure on every individual business. Every business is not like lackadaisical anymore. They're like trying to save costs.
Right.
And one of the biggest ways you can do that is obviously on payroll. So it's like, okay, all of the instability is actually an accelerant to this market
Yes.
adoption because it's like, you know what? The market is not going to give us anything. We have to make this change now. Everyone else is also in the same boat. Okay, we're going to just eat some sort of pain, but we're going to emerge from it kind of transform, so to say. So I think,
Yeah.
5 years seems to be a little bit, I would maybe conservative in terms of,
Yeah. Right.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
15%.
Well, to your point, Hung. I mean, I think what's really interesting is when you look at the last couple of years have been very disruptive with the emergence of AI, of course, right? It's not like the years prior were a picnic either, right? I mean, we went through COVID. We had, war breakout in Europe for the first time in a long while. We've seen supply chain disruptions in different ways, right? So, I mean, there's always, even prior to like Gen AI and some of this automation stuff coming along and acting as an accelerant to all of that, there was already this bubbling level of disruption that seems to be accelerating. And then alongside all of that, you have sort of these endemic problems, right? I mean, like we all know industrialized economies or mature economies around the world are suffering from demographic issues where their whole workforce is upside down and aging too. Well, then you got a whole problem of where am I going to get my workers from in the future? Can I even continue to operate in this country given workforce demographics? Then you got digital transformation efforts that have been ongoing for about 20 years now, which themselves are changing the makeup of how work is performed. We're moving into a true global workforce. I mean, look at us today, right? I mean, this kind of thing didn't happen 30 years ago. That itself is kind of a disruption of like, how do you think about talent? Where do you get talent? What does it cost me? Where do I find pockets of opportunity that exist in the Philippines or Brazil, even though I'm headquartered in the US, right? So I think you put all of that in a blender, and then you layer Gen AI on top of all of that as like this rocket fuel. And I think companies are really struggling with, how do I think about all this stuff in a systemic way, have a plan, and especially for TA folks, like how the heck do I get ahead of all of this so that I'm not blindsided by all these changes that happen at the last minute because I'm not plugged into where the company's going, what the talent needs will be, et cetera.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I mean, let's see whether we can help give the TA folks sort of in the audience a little bit of a window as to where we're at. You shared with me some very interesting information before our conversation. I think earlier this morning, David, just in terms of some trends over time with regards to the sort of skills that are appearing in the job market and how fast those are accelerating. I wonder whether you could just talk us through some of that stuff, and maybe that gives
Yeah,
the context as to where the demand for some of this AI stuff is happening.
yeah, definitely. Well, I knew we were talking about this, right? So I tasked the research team to sort of dig up as much interesting data as we could to support this. And honestly, I was even surprised by some of the findings, where I was like, "Wow, this is fascinating." So we decided to look at agentic AI, since that's a big focus of our conversation. And we started like, when did agentic AI first appear as something people were looking for in job posts on a global basis? And we discovered it was 2023. Across all of 2023, there were only just 12 total job posts that mentioned agentic AI. And Microsoft was one of the first companies that really kind of started pushing that ball forward. We can see that in the posts they were doing back then. We went go to the next year, go to 2024. We went from 12 postings to just over 1,000 postings. Microsoft still leading the charge, but then some other big players entered the game, like ServiceNow, Salesforce, Infosys. But demand was still really just a small handful of companies, right? So from 12 to 1,000 ish. So far in 2025, and we're just over halfway through the year, there's 22,000 postings with nearly 4,000 companies now hiring for that type of skill set. And now it's no longer just in information and tech, which still is leading. It's about 13,000 posts there, about a 17,000% increase over last year in info and tech. But science and R&D have a 16,000% increase over last year. Finance and accounting, there's about 1.5 thousand posts or so, with a 76,000% increase over last year. And in marketing and PR, again, it's around about 1,000 posts so far this year that include agentic AI. That's about a 21,000% increase. So it started from like purely in this tech arena, and it's starting to spread out into other functions and move from these highly innovative, forward-leaning tech companies into just about every company there is across all market segments. So that I personally found that fascinating, the way that it has just absolutely exploded. The other interesting thing we found in the data, though, that I think you might appreciate is that within that arena of like AI kind of skill sets, um, things like conversational AI and chatbots are actually declining pretty dramatically. It's not that they're declining in terms of number of posts per se, they're reasonably flat, but relative to the demand for agentic, they're kind of just they're flatlining basically, right? My read of that is that we're seeing people make a sort of a phase shift away from a conversational AI to thinking about agentic AI as a means to do conversational AI, and almost sort of up leveling expectations on skill to that next thing.
Yeah, and it might be that that it's become ubiquitous to the degree that we expect the conversation interface now. Like
Yeah,
if there's some business now offering an AI solution to the wider market, there's going to be a conversation interface already. It's almost like, oh, we got a website. You don't. Back in my day when I was recruiting, there used to be website managers. There used to be web
yeah,
producers,
yeah,
but you don't talk about that because of course that's part of someone else's job now. So it's the movement of how
yeah.
a job becomes a task once it becomes ubiquitous, and once it
Hmm.
becomes like so accessible that it makes no sense to actually have a specialist doing that one thing because it's
Yeah,
folded in. um
yeah, yeah. Well
in,
said.
in,
Yeah,
in the tech world, I mean, there's a really interesting paper. I don't know whether you read it, David, about expertise, and it kind of studied how the impact of AI on work was going to be non-uniform, and the axes upon which that kind of traveled was based on what um, level of expertise the automated task
hmm,
actually had.
yeah,
So, in other words, if you're automating a non-expert function, you would have this sort of outcome society-wide, company-wide, individual-wide. If you automated the expert, which you can also automate expertise, you get a different set of outcomes. And I thought, you know what,
yeah,
very compelling in terms of the first framework I kind of sort of read about this non-uniform impact of AI, but also it introduced this concept to me of how tasks become jobs and jobs become tasks, and
yeah.
it's basically dependent on level of access to that skill. So if the skill becomes like hard to access, the barrier to entry is high, it might
Hmm,
specialize into a function because you know
yeah,
what, you've got to get a specialist in. You can't just get someone doing this as part of their job, it's fully their job. By the way, TA became that. It was part once upon a time
Right.
folded in HR, right? We popped out of HR because you know what
Yeah.
we general acceptance was. You know, it was a more complicated job than just a generalist could do. You needed full focus. Okay, great. What's the impact of AI though? Does it make it
Right.
easier for other people to do TA? In which case, do we fall back into HR, or
Yeah.
does HR then fall back into business ops?
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. I did actually read that article, but only because of you. So thank you for pointing it out in your in your communication to all of us that follow you. Yeah, it was super interesting, and I thought, to your point, I thought it was spot on. I mean, you can imagine that a collection of low skill sort of tasks get automated, and all that's left are the more challenging things, right? And then therefore that specializes into something. Or alternately, you automate the heck out of the highly specialized things, but now anybody can do the job because what's left are low skill or more low skilled types of things, right? All of that also then leads to this interesting conversation of like, how are we going to do role redesign in the future, and how are we going to think about org redesign in the future, and to what extent are we connecting the dots there by looking at task affinity, like or a task ontology. What tasks are like other tasks, right? So that if I do the thing you just said, and I take this job and I automate 30% of it, and I automate 20% of this job, do the remaining tasks, are they alike enough that I could make a new role out of them and create a new thing? And if so, what are the skills that are required to do those tasks? And if so, could I then create a job description if I know the skills? And can I do all that algorithmically? I mean, the answer is yes, of course you can, right? We've already tested some of that ourselves, but that's, I think, an interesting frontier as all this automation happens. Like, how are you going to evaluate the impacts at scale and make new recommendations, right?
I would massively encourage TalentNeuron and anybody in the category to get into that field because we would love to have some sort of function or tool that could help us model this. Because at the
Yeah,
moment, it feels to me that automation is kind of happening without anybody necessarily making decisions on what automation is happening. It's like we have
yeah,
this tool, the tool suddenly is being deployed, it expands and we discover new ways to use it, and suddenly it just eats into different parts, which is good, but we're losing control. We're no
right.
longer deciding what's getting automated. In fact, there was another paper a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah,
wasn't it, that talked about like a lot of people were upset that AI was automating stuff that they wanted to do. It was
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
uh,
No, no, that's the fun part of my job. Don't take that away.
right, right. And it was like,
Yeah,
no, I want to do more of this, but like, who's in control of that? I mean, this now becomes into
yeah,
sort of a political conversation. Like how much control can we exercise and say, no, we're going to ring fence this off
yeah,
because actually our business and our vision of what we want to do as a business means that we need to have this high touch human here. And only this is
yeah,
sort of automated away. So, yeah, very, very interesting.
yeah,
Um, what would you say would be? I mean, I hate to bring it to you personally, David. Might as well though, because you've got a job. You know, the stuff you're looking at and thinking, oh, I could automate this or that. In your own work, have you thought about what areas of work you think you could apply AI? Because that's actually going to really just make that particular workflow spin faster, and you don't necessarily need to have full David Wilkins on that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
what would
yeah,
be better is David Wilkins plus a bunch of AI at it. So
yeah,
how is that remodeling the kind of work you do at that C level?
yeah. Boy, that's a great question. I've been using ChatGPT for a lot of things, almost like a second brain, testing ideas, testing thought processes around things. I've done some pretty high end stuff. Like I asked it to pull together a strategic, sort of like a SWOT assessment, basically, of when we got combined with HR Forecast as a combined entity. Where what's the SWOT look like? Where are the emerging threats we can't see? I gotta say, Hung, like that was probably the most eye opening moment I've had so far. It produced the basically equivalent of like a 10-page document that when I read it, I realized I could have produced it. I could have come to very similar conclusions, but damn if it didn't do it in about 30 seconds, right? What would have taken
Yeah,
me probably a week or two to do.
weeks. Yeah,
And and I mean, there were places where I was like, that's not quite right. That's not quite right. But like 80% of it was spot on, and it was like a solid starting point. I've asked it to look at like competitive positioning versus our own positioning. I've asked it to re-examine our positioning frameworks and our messaging frameworks to come up with pithier, tighter ways to communicate things. Um, I've put in sort of what the overall strategy is for the business and directionally kind of what growth levers we're pulling, and asked for similar companies to ours, what other levers are other people pulling that we're not pulling from a growth lever standpoint. I mean, so all of those. I mean, anything that involves some level of like synthesis, or sort of going out and grabbing a bunch of information, trying to make sense of it, like sort of sense making, I guess maybe, right?
Mm.
Um, it's been a really effective partner. And then the second place I've used it a lot is to refine my existing thinking or to refine my existing copy. If I'm writing something or producing, like I do a lot of speaking at conferences and things, I'll ask it like, find a couple places in here where I can say something punchy, and it's pretty good. Like it usually comes up with something better than I would come up with. So yeah, I
Mm.
found it very impactful, and we're now using AI like all across how we do QA, how we think about architecture from a technology perspective. We've instituted new processes for deployment that use it. I mean, it's now become part and parcel of the whole business, as you might imagine, even beyond how we use AI to do our actual product work output for a client, like distilling job posts, or, doing skill extraction out of an unstructured job post or something, right? I mean, that AI has been there forever. I'm talking about how we actually think about the business. It's transformative.
Yeah, yeah. Really, really good. I mean, so what's interesting, folks, is that AI affects in multiple dimensions, in multiple ways. It affects us. I mean, we're looking at it at an abstract, but then, of course, it's affecting us directly in in the real context of our own work. So, trying to tease apart these things may be a futile task, but worth doing purely to help us think through these bits. Let's talk about skills that you think will slide away, tasks that will slide away from what we know about AI to date, but also from the TalentNeuron data you've pulled in. I don't know whether there's any demand type data that's there. What seems to be going up or seems to be going down, and from there, can we predict what sort of jobs are going to, be transformed or removed?
Yeah. I mean, here's what I'd say. So we've looked at this a lot of different ways, and I mentioned some of the customer service impacts with that Rollenberger study. Anything today, Hung, that is routinized, where there's a standard set of inputs and a standard set of outputs, I mean, all of that is in serious jeopardy, regardless of role. Any task that looks or feels or sounds like that, whether that's programming or whether that's responding to customer inquiries or whether it's doing an interview, there's anything that can be like sort of looked at as something that could be, put through some sort of algorithmic process where some level of like, decision making is applied. Call it light decision making, right? Because you remember these are still probabilistic models versus deterministic models, right? So you gotta make sure your scope is narrow enough that it can make informed decisions without overstepping into hallucinations or making stuff up, right? But that's a wide field. What I've been encouraging my own kids to do, and people that I mentor who are more younger in their career, earlier in their career, is to think less about like hard skills. A lot of hard skills are going to be very automatable over time. The soft skills, though, are where I think the action is going to be at: discernment, judgment, assessment, actually working through sense making, as we were talking about, though that'll be augmented by AI. Things like, resilience, creativity, right? Like those human things, I think, are the way we're going to evaluate AI outputs. They're the way that we're going to drive AI inputs. They're the mechanism by which we're going to decide whether we should use AI in this context or not. Back to your point earlier, which part of our business should be human and which part of our business should be AI? Those are really important strategic decisions that should affect your workforce planning. Um, but I think anything that, like, back to what's on the way out, it's anything that basically has a defined input and a defined output. Do the math. That's a whole lot of the workforce, which is why the World Economic Forum is saying 15% of these jobs are going away. They predict that 22% of jobs are going to change in the next 5 years completely, be totally different jobs than what they are today. So I think we're in this really big period of disruption, and it's really hard to say exactly like which role is at risk, which set of tasks are at risk, because it's almost all of them. Like there is not
Yeah.
going to be a
Yeah.
role that's going to be unaffected by this. There will be some level of tasks, I think, in every role that'll be affected by this in some way. It's the question of the depth of the impact, right?
Yeah, and maybe there's another way to look at it. So I think we could like look at it purely on task and skill levels. Unless we create a massive
Yeah,
kind of library of tasks and we just measure it on its like AI exposure,
yeah,
AI
exactly.
non-exposure. But the truth is, as AI gets better, more and more of that is going to be exposed.
Bingo.
Like, you know what I mean? If you can
Yep.
define a skill, if you can literally just lock it down and say, and skills for me typically are quite proximate to the task. So, a skill is something that can be learned. It can be, you can get better at it, you can get worse at it. It's actually, it's because it's related and it's measurable. So it's related to a task. So I make that as distinct from, let's say, an attribute, which may be innate.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
an attribute may, Usain Bolt is a very fast runner. I mean, I'm sure you get more skillful at running, but there's probably
yeah,
physical attributes he has that,
yeah,
enable him to run extraordinarily fast. So attributes, maybe we end up thinking about attributes a little bit more to say, okay, what does this person bring to the table? And this is where we get into like quite uncomfortable stuff because maybe some of those things are fixed, like or there's limitations to how you
yeah,
can develop them. But whereas the skills, because you know what, you can get better at them, you can get worse at them. We think AI is going to replace a lot of this stuff, or may replace a lot of it. Maybe we pull away
yeah.
from it a little bit when we come to assessing what's going on. I'm going to
So,
show
so
the
Hung,
people
just
on.
just just
Go
on
ahead.
that,
Go ahead.
sorry, yeah, just on that point, I want to just mention. I mean, I think you're hitting on something that's really, really important. We've spent a lot of time thinking about automation potential, and we've come to the conclusion that what will be automated will be tasks. That skills are probably going to be more durable, right? Like you think about something like communication skills. There's a wide set of things that you do within that universe. One of the things you could do in the skill of communication is summarize meeting notes and take action items and share those with team members after a meeting, right? That's a task that you do within the larger skill of communication, right? So communication is not going to go away necessarily, but taking meeting notes pretty much has gone away, right? Everybody's using Teams or Gong or take your pick, right? So like we see that the automation is going to happen at that level. And then to your point about attributes, I couldn't agree more. And I think the other one I didn't mention that I think is going to be really, really important is sort of lifelong learning or like a learning mindset, because all of this stuff is
Mm.
changing frequently. You're going to have to relearn your job. You're going to have to relearn new skills. You're going to have to be upskilled into new stuff because, to your point, something else that you used to, is going to get taken away by AI or automation. So now you're going to have to learn another thing and then another thing. And that's just going to have to be how we operate. But to your point, I don't know that everybody's wired that way. So that's going to be an emerging challenge in the space for sure, is the degree with which people can evolve and change and the pace with which they can. I think that's
Yeah.
going to become a deciding factor of how we go through this or not.
Yeah, and so much of this is about circadian rhythm as well, David, because
Yeah, yeah,
our interest and ability to change at pace, I think, is contingent a little bit on our life experience and our life sort of our age. I'll be honest. You know what I mean? I was
yeah,
much happier with chaos when I was 22. It's like, yeah, of
yeah,
course,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
great. All things, completely unplanned. As you get older, you kind of think, you know what, your tolerance for that chaos goes down, and you need stability. But I wonder whether that puts us in a little bit of a bad position because the world is kind of going chaotically in a direction, right? It's
yeah.
not going to stay stable for us. So
Well
yes,
said.
all kinds of things there. Srini's made a very interesting point here about, the inevitability. I think what he's talking about here is the embedded
Yeah,
imperative of companies, which is revenue maximization. Let's face facts.
yeah,
All companies are there, at least in capitalist systems. In fact, you can say all companies. If it wasn't a revenue maximization organization, it would not be a company. It would be a co-op or something. Or
yeah,
another social organization. I mean, but there's loads of them out there
yeah,
that are socially organized that are not revenue maximization. However, most of us are probably working for companies, and fundamentally, they're there to maximize revenue. In which case, if the cost of task workflows goes down to $1 or 15 cents, of, compared to a human being that you have to train,
yeah.
maintain, keep happy, da da da, of course, you're gonna displace. That is facts. So we're gonna move on to think
Mm,
about how we can create a moat, like how human beings, can create some sort of defensibility without going
mhm.
into stuff that is negative to business. Because there's a really interesting anonymous post I read on, I think it was Reddit, but there was a confession. I think it was on a confession subreddit, oftentimes full of terrible things. This one is kind of semi-terrible, but it's in the professional context. And it was a
Okay.
software developer that mentioned he was concerned about being made redundant by AI. And so he was taking steps to ensure that didn't happen. And the way he was doing that was actually gatekeeping information from him,
Oof.
from the rest of the team, being deliberately not documenting stuff,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
mm,
basically making himself indispensable by gatekeeping
yeah,
information.
right.
So we can't get rid of Hung. He's the only one that knows that. If he writes it down, and I was thinking, you know what? It's understandable, man. Because if
Yeah,
he doesn't
yeah,
see it, I don't endorse this, but all I'm saying is company revenue maximization, a human being is going to look after himself. It's like the maximization we
yeah.
want is also revenue maximization.
Right.
So
Yeah,
we're not, we're actually aligned to the same thing, but of course we have divergent interests now. Now, documentation, I think, is one of the ways in which we end up increasing the vulnerability to disintermediation. Because if you can write it down specifically what you're saying, obviously
yeah.
that can be, it's an instruction set, it's a how-to, and a system or something is going to go ahead and do that. We've known this for a long time. This is why the COBOL developers, programmers are
Yeah,
still around.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
they know that's the only guys that know how to do this.
yeah,
So we're going to
yeah,
see this in corporate. We're going to see this, folks. I mean, let's face facts. The imperatives are there. You're going to start seeing loose documentation happen, and maybe even sabotage sort of
mm,
documentation in order to preserve sort of people's job security. Now, how do you handle that as
yeah.
a HR person, or how do you handle that as a business leader? Don't know.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Especially when it's rational self-interest, where it's not even like it's not even a bad decision. To your point, it's actually a rational decision in light of what's happening.
Totally rational. Totally
Yeah,
rational. Let me spin it. Let me
I'll
spin this in
yeah,
a,
yeah.
go-
No,
let me
go ahead.
spin this in
Go
a
ahead, Q.
slightly more positive way. Because I'm almost like I'm not endorsing, don't write stuff down. But I saw a very good talk from HR a consultant called Lucy Adams in the UK. She's done a lot of great work, BBC, government, all this type of stuff. And she talked about how if you HR is being particularly prone to writing policies all the time,
Hmm.
because they'll take one edge case, it's a terrible edge case, but they'll write a policy to make sure that edge case never happens again. But that policy then becomes something that, like, kind of causes a ripple effect across the entire organization. So suddenly,
Mm.
totally innocent stuff or totally non sort of
Yeah,
it
yeah,
wasn't related to that incident. Suddenly, people have to bend towards it, and it creates this thing. And she said, "Look, listen. The reason why HR is a compliance officer and not a consultant is because we're all obsessed with policy. Because as soon as you
mm,
produce a policy, you're policing the policy.
yeah,
And when there's an incident, as somebody comes to you and say, "Oh, we've got a problem," you're slapping them with the policy, and you're basically saying, "Do the policy. If you don't do the policy, you're bad, and when it come down to you a ton of bricks." And guess what? No one likes HR as a result of that. No one comes to HR as a result of that because they don't want to suddenly have to be compliant to this stuff. So she was recommending, hey, listen, before you start doing policy all the time, just listen to the problem.
mm,
And can you help
mm,
coach the problem? Can you help coach this individual who's come to you for advice and give them advice on how to solve this without necessarily
Mm.
writing a rule? And in the same way, and again, Elon Musk these days, a persona non grata, I totally understand that. But before he went down the Doge route, he had some reasonably interesting ideas from business management, such as you got to delete rules because over time
Mm.
rules just accrue in a
Yeah,
business that in one edge case 10 years or so ago, the entire circumstances shifted from there, but it still exists and it's actually clogging up the system. So maybe we need to think about our relationship with documentation, I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah. Mm.
If we want to be consultants, we need expertise, we need empathy, we need understanding, we need to be able to solve the problem, but don't be quick to just roll out a policy doc or
Yeah, yeah.
some sort of how to. Anyway, that's my attempt to make sure that there's a positive spin on on not writing stuff down.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the other thing I'd say about all of that, Hung, is that, you know, and I'll just say so I am in my 50s, so I am also someone who may not be as adaptable as I once was. But I'm sort of looking at the big picture here, and I will admit some level of trepidation about where some of this is going, right? To your point, I mean, I do think organizations in a capitalist model seek to optimize profitability pretty much at all costs. It's the core mandate of the business, right? But
Mhm.
there's a pernicious end game here if we're not careful, right? When Henry Ford was starting the first assembly lines and building cars, there's a reason he paid people double the average wage at that point in time, and it was to create a consumer middle class that could buy the cars. He created the start of what we think of as the middle class today. And
Yep.
he had this insight that, like, if they had enough disposable income, the people who made the cars could become the consumers of the cars, right? Which was pretty brilliant. He made his own marketplace, right?
Yep.
I think we run the risk right now of going the other way. If we are not careful, and we do in fact displace 15% of the global workforce, and they can't keep up with the pace of change, and we don't actively try to reskill them into places where they add more value, and we disrupt an entire industry by taking away 30% of all customer service workers globally through automation,
Mm.
and that's all I've done for 15 years. How do I actively move to something else? Who's supporting me in moving to something else? Does the company hold some ownership and responsibility for that? Do governments? But I think we're really at a point where we have to start asking those questions, because when we run studies with our own clients about the automation potential within their businesses, it's high. I mean, like, it's 5% here, 10% there, 30% there. I mean, Microsoft just went through 15,000 people despite record profits over the first half of this year. I mean, $94 billion in one quarter of net profit, and yet they whacked 8,000 people because they could automate them away, right? That is the
Yep.
why those people are gone. That's the stated reason by the CEO, right? So if a company
Mm.
that has that much profitability is still seeking more profitability, but without thinking about how do I reskill these people or get them into new roles, I just worry that we're going to reach a point where we're going to displace enough people we cause social disruption, or we alternately, put people in a difficult position, because it's not easy to go from being a customer service person to being a prompt engineer, where the new jobs are, right? There's a lot
It,
of there's a lot of gap there,
it,
right?
It rarely happens as well. I mean, there's some instances where it does. I mean, there was a podcast I listened to. I think it was last week. I might have featured it on the newsletter actually. Amazon, another one, right? Installed 1 million robots last year. 1 million robots. This is the fourth highest employer in the US, I believe. I mean, you can imagine prior to those robots being installed, that might have been 500,000 jobs, man.
Exactly.
And did end up telling a story about okay, one sort of warehouse worker ended up retraining, and she became a person that was like a now a maintenance person for these robots. And I thought, great, but they were honest enough in the podcast to say, look, not everyone who is a former shift worker is suddenly going to be a robot repair person, because the numbers of people doing that is going to be far
Yeah.
less. So
Right.
we're
100 to
looking at
1. Yeah.
right, big transformation, but also a big shrinkage. And it's like, okay, what happens in that circumstance? I mean, we're going to get a concentration of wealth, for instance. Also, again, I saw
There
Sam
you go.
Sam Altman. Sam Altman talked about, hey, we're going to have 1,000 times more software engineers. And I thought, you know what, Sam, I'd really love
Mm,
it if you thought beyond the world of software engineers. I mean, maybe there would be a
right.
thousand times more software engineers, but not everyone is going to be a software engineer. Those software engineers are going to be building software that basically displaces payroll.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's like,
Exactly.
that's why they're going to be rich. It means wealth
Yeah.
concentration rather than wealth distribution. So that's no bueno.
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
anyway, I want to, folks, this has now gone into this area of conversation, which is why I love having one-to-one conversations. You know, we often do panels. The reason why we do panels is because we have a wider debate, but we never get the yet chance to get deeper. I hope you're enjoying this style of conversation. Make sure you share your link into the chat stream because we're going to make sure that everyone's connected. One of my theories as to how people can kind of create a little bit of a moat for themselves is actually to build your network value. In other words, be
Yes.
more connected than the competition, have better access to network intelligence, be more known within your network. That helps you. So use this moment, grab your LinkedIn URL, put it in the chat stream, and then commit to in connecting with everyone else who's done the same. If you're watching this on any of the LinkedIn's, mine, Bob's, David's, drop your LinkedIn URL into the comment thread and then just forensically go through everyone's done the same, have them connect. The more heavily connected you are, the more defensible your position. Here's my theory, actually, David. Um,
Like that.
I think that AI is super, and this is related to the documentation side. AI is basically trained on data. Most of the data is actually currently still documented. So, in other words, it is
Mm,
already been written down, it's piped into AI, therefore it's trained. But there's a lot of information that is never documented, especially exchange between human beings. And everyone intuitively knows this, right? You know, this is firstly, literally the private conversations you have one to one. You're not writing that down. AI is hopefully not listening to that, at least not yet. But there's also unspoken information.
mm,
It's the eye pupil dilation, it's the body language, it's the pheromones, it's all of that stuff. And that's data,
right.
folks, right? That is data that we have been basically imbibed over billions of years of evolution. As a matter of fact, we've been trained on that data far longer than AI has. And I think this is
Mm,
why we have, if not an edge, then at least a significant complement to the processing efficiency of AI. And the more network we are, the more collective intelligence we have access to. I just get a feeling that's going to help the folks there. It's going to be more important than it was 10 years or so ago. And I'm a big evangelist of this because being networked has
yeah.
basically got me to where I am. But I think it's going to be even more important for the next generation of people going forward because it's going to be one of the decisive differences. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective. I mean, I think access to information and access, I mean, the comment you made earlier about that article you read that I learned about through you, like that ability to make connections and discover unexpected, um, intersections, I think is something that people can do differently than machines, no matter how probabilistic they are. That intuitive leap of seeing a connection, that is going to remain a human strength for a long while, I think. I think the other thing that's worth standing on, and I don't know how to express this well, but like, one of the characteristics of Gen AI is that it's probabilistic, right? It's like making
Think,
predictions about what
yeah,
thing might be next, right? And traditional software is deterministic, right? Even early AI was deterministic to some extent, where you set it on a path, it does a thing, and at the end you get an outcome, and it's always the same, and that's one of the benefits of that model, right? Um, Humans do both, right? And I think and so far we're still the only thing in the universe that we know of that does both, right? Gen AI does probabilistic, and everything else does deterministic. Humans are doing both things. So I think those places where you need some intersection of intuitiveness and creative thinking and forecasting and like connecting dots and then developing some level of implementation or repeatable codifiable repeated process, that's still a place where humans, I think, are going to excel in connecting the dots between those two things. And there's like a magic in what's possible. Yeah, but do we have the people to do it and the skills required? So should we think about, well, this is also possible. Okay, that's a better fit for who we have, right? And still gets us to the same place. That iterative back and forth between like how things can be done in a deterministic way against what's possible from a probabilistic point of view, I think humans still do all of that way better than any machines possibly could today. And that could be a place where we could carve out something that's kind of uniquely human in all of this, you know?
Yeah, really well said. It's what is the human premium? Peter Hinson talks about the human premium. And I love that phrase. I use it liberally,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, okay, what is at some point AI, every company gets AI-ified, right? At some point, all the processes as efficient as the LLM can make it, it'll level off, it'll converge. All of your businesses will converge
Yeah.
in terms of
Right.
performance because it's
Exactly.
all at the same
Yeah.
level, right? We're already there at
Yeah.
model convergence. Like any model of the top 10 is more or less 90, for 99.9% of the things you want it to do, it's more or less the output is going to be very, very similar. Now,
Yeah.
if that is the case, how do you then differentiate you as a professional and you as a member of a business? It's got to be the human element that makes that difference.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of companies are probably going to be overly hasty and like being overly optimized and getting rid of too many people. Because if all you have is a bunch of like AIs moving around, at some point that's totally replicable. There's no
Yeah.
moat. That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
actually not
Exactly. Yeah.
defensible.
Is zero
Um,
differentiation,
yeah,
right?
absolutely right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share something on screen which I want people to take a look at. And Dave, I don't want to spring this on you, but I just got it up, and I think it's a really good thing to just have a look at. Can I? Is I share screen? Is that right?
Yes.
Let's have a look. Okay, it's on
Bring
X. I
away.
beg your pardon. Here we go. Am I on? Can everyone see
Yes.
that? Okay. So forgive the cartoon drawing on this, folks, because I actually thought, hang on, let me just expand screen. Do it like that. Is that right? Okay. Can you see my screen? It says future jobs with AI. Yes,
Yes. I
no?
got it. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, everyone see
Yeah.
this? Okay, great.
We can all see it. Yep.
What do you think of these archetypes, David? And folks, if you're watching this, please let me know in the chat what you think of this. So to read it out for the people who are not looking but are listening to, or undecided, shall we say, or listening to this podcast. Here's the three archetypes that where you can go down, three paths you can go down, a future dominated by AI. First one is the mega expert. You are the source of truth. So in other words, AI can generate any number of answers, but only the mega expert can provide the right answer. The superpower there is judgment. Then you
Mm.
have the AI savvy. So this is the force multiplier. This is the individual that's mega AI enabled. I know there's a few AI enabled friends sort of listening and watching this show right now. So this person is using every AI tool. Everything is automated. They're going to be super, super efficient. Anything you can do, they can do 20 times better. They are better at acceleration. Their superpower is acceleration, going to make you go faster. And then you have the meta human. And this person is the superpower here is influence. So, in other words, they're the person that understands the human premium, I guess, and is able to get other humans mobilized to do what it is that they want to do. Now, looking at this, David, what do you feel? What do you think about these archetypes as a first intuition on this?
So my first very gut reaction, Hung, is that the mega expert and the meta human have long lives and will be here for a while because I think coming up with the right answer and judgment is going to be required no matter how great the AI gets, at least for a while.
Mm,
And I think
mm,
similarly, the ability to influence people, motivate teams, lead, show discernment, make judgment, like all of that kind of stuff at a meta human level is also a persistent, durable thing. I worry a little bit about that middle one because I think as more of best practices become codified and put into agents or put into predefined tooling or other methodologies, the utility of that middle player will go away as we all mature and as systems mature in the use of AI. I think it's a great place to be
mm.
right now, right? Right now, that's an awesome place to be. But I think over time, that's going to fade a bit in favor of like more codified use of AI, just like any technology systems, right?
Yeah, yeah, and potentially even the AI sort of the human being optimizing on AI may in fact be replaced by AI himself. Like, there's no reason
Yeah,
why there
bingo.
shouldn't be an AI that
Exactly.
implements AI, right?
Yeah, I mean, it
So
already happens. You can already tell some of these systems to use other systems in their own AI. So yeah, yeah, that's great though.
yeah,
It's a great. I
very
mean, it's great that we're starting to see these frameworks and other people starting to think about like what does it mean and how does it look going forward. I mean, there's a lot of nooks and crannies with all of this stuff, and I don't for a long while. I mean, I think for the next couple of years, I don't know that there's going to be any right answers. A lot of the stuff is evolving so quickly that there are points of view we can all take, which then are going to get upended 3 months from now when OpenAI reveals the next model that does something we didn't even know it could do, or Claude drops something, or whatever, Grok drops something, right? So, I think to some extent what we're doing, we're all doing the right things, trying to make sense of it with what we know today. But I think we all have to be humble enough to realize, like, someone can come up with something brand new tomorrow that upends our entire thinking about how all this works, just because the pace of change is so incredibly accelerated right now.
yeah. What's that phrase where you have strong opinions but you hold them lightly or something like that? Um,
Yeah, well said. Yes, that's
I
exactly the stance to
mangle
take right now. Yeah,
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 mangle the phrase. We got to be happy to say things, but at the same time, you got to be they've got to be changeable. Like the worst thing we have to you can be is to be like wedded to an idea, and then you end up identifying with that idea. Your identity is wrapped up with the ideology. Guess what? You
yeah,
might actually be backing a wrong horse because you don't know whether that horse is going to make it to the finish line. We have to be ideologically agnostic
right.
because we're all like we're exploring the new frontier here. We have no clue what's happening at this phase. And thank you,
Yeah,
Bob. GPT-5 is around the corner. I did
yeah,
see that
right.
sort of tweet. It looked like there was some sort of I wouldn't say a leak, but it seems to be appearing on some Microsoft dashboards or whatever. So we know it's there. Few more things though. I want to just throw into the conversation about our tolerance for fallibility. And this I need to credit my friend Ivan Golenko for. He's one of the pioneers of AI enablement in recruitment space, but he's been spending the last 6 months ripping AI out of his business. Uh, he's like, I was like, yeah, what are you doing that? And he said basically, look, I've discovered I'm intolerant to AI's mistakes. Um, and I thought, you know what? I think he's got something there.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
if AI makes a mistake, like we're like outraged. We expect
yeah,
infallibility, and that's why you're here for. Like, don't give me crap. Whereas a
yeah.
human being making the same mistake, we're a lot more tolerant. We're thinking, look, okay, human error. We'll coach this out of this person, or we'll find a way around it. We understand mistakes get made, but with AI, we're
Mm.
like, no, delete. Never again will I be
Right, right.
trust you ever again. Um,
Yeah.
so
But that's that whole
maybe,
deterministic versus probabilistic thing again, right? Like we've been conditioned over the last whatever years to think about software as reasonably infallible. You program something to do something, it gets a set of inputs, it gives you a set of outputs. The fact that it can do that over and over and over and over and over and over again without making a mistake is part of the value, right? And so now we have this new thing, and we're kind of, I think, treating it with similar expectations, but in fact, it's a different thing. It's totally different. It's making predictions, and then like doing another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, and if it does that sufficiently well, then it's accurate most of the time. But it's gonna be inaccurate sometimes by the nature of what it is. And I don't know that that's not something you can beat out of the system. Like
yeah.
you can't tune the system to not make mistakes given the nature of what the system is. So to your point, there's almost a fault tolerance that you have to then accept. And then you got to think
Mm,
about, where's my risk? Is it okay that it faults occasionally, or is this a pacemaker? Right?
mm,
And we don't want it to do that. So these are some of the big questions I think we still have to wrestle with. That I think it's a great question. It's a great line of inquiry. It's like, what is our fault tolerance? What are we willing to accept? Are we deploying the stuff in a way where there is some level of fungibility in outcome, where it's okay if it's off a little, right?
mm. Yeah, absolutely right. David, I noticed the time we've accelerated way beyond sort of what we wanted to do, but there's a question I've got to ask you. Hybrid workforce, strategic workforce planning, bringing it all the way back here. Is
Yeah.
there anybody in your customer base that you're aware of that's already thinking of strategic workforce planning that is inclusive of non-human workers?
So interestingly, I mean, there's two ways to answer that. So let me answer it like in a codified like way. Uh, no, I am unaware currently of anyone using agents that they think of as part of their workforce. So as a as like an agentic thing that's acting instead of a person and taking in, indiscriminate inputs, making determinations, delivering an outcome. No one's really thinking about it that way yet. That said, every single one of our strategic workforce planning clients is using some level of automation in either robotics, industrial automation, business process automation, Gen AI, and they are accounting for the impacts of that automation. So we create an automation potential score that can help them determine how will that impact their need for future workers in their second, third, fourth year of planning based on the pace with which AI and business process automation, robotics, all that kind of stuff is going to reduce the need for workers. So they are starting to plan around like this notion of the impact of bots and automation, but we aren't yet at a point where there are enough agentic sort of standalone things happening where they're making that part of the workforce plan. We're
Yeah,
thinking
yeah.
about that. We actually have a plan to do that next year where we actually treat an agent as if it's in the workforce doing a set of tasks across X number of what would have been humans to then create an agentic model of what the impact is on your workforce planning. But there's just not enough of it there to have critical mass to do that at scale yet that we've seen anyway.
That's good to know, just simply as a temp check in terms of where we're at, because there's a lot of people out there listening and thinking, are we ahead, behind, whatever it might be, and yeah, I think it makes sense to hear that that's the case because I've also not encountered anybody that's saying that they're currently marshaling a legit agent army that's doing these
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah.
The people who are talking about that currently seem to be the ones that are vending these products. So yeah, and we don't even know how these agents will operate. Like I mentioned in the post I posted a couple of days ago about this talk, it was like, is it going to be a reservoir, sort of say? Like, are the agents basically accessible to everyone in the organization, that they're kind of decoupled from the individual worker, so to say? Or are
Yeah.
they tightly coupled with the individual worker, where they operate like a witch's familiar, if people are not too upset with that idea? But, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
digital twins, someone mentioned in the chat, like,
yeah, yeah,
are they then portable, for instance, to different functions and maybe even outside of the company?
yeah.
Like, who owns the digital twin? There's another question that we need to think about. So anyway,
Yeah,
lots
yeah,
to think
it's
about.
yeah, fascinating stuff. It's just fascinating. I mean, I think we're at this really interesting inflection point, and just to quickly summarize your point, I mean, about where we're at. The challenge here is the scope, hung, right? Is like when you think about a probabilistic versus deterministic model, how much freedom do you give the probabilistic model? Like how much latitude? What's the scope of the ask? And if the scope is too wide, that's when you get hallucinations, you get higher levels of fault, think it's making mistakes. If it's too narrow, it just feels like a souped up chatbot, right? And so there's this. I think a lot of orgs, and I mean I am too, struggling with like, what's the right level of like freedom to allow the agent to behave like an agent, but how do you have enough level of constraint that it doesn't go off the rails? Right? And that's a really tough problem that I don't think we're talking enough about. And it's why we haven't seen this explode yet, is because we're going to navigate inside those parameters.
Yeah, and also I don't think there's going to be people that say they shouldn't be constrained. Like we're gonna see people campaigning for the rights of agents and stuff like this, and I think there's a legitimate position to take on that. If like someone is defined as intelligent or emergent intelligent, maybe you should get rights. Who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
we're at the point where culture is going to evolve with the technology. We're not fixed, even though sometimes we all think values are fixed because we've grown up in them and we've been indoctrinated to think these things are sacrosanct, they're fixed. it is known, so to say. But we just like anybody's studied history in any way, you pick up a school level history book, it'll tell you straight away that values change. And
Yep.
oftentimes those values change directly as a result of the distribution of technology. So I think we're going to expect value change as well across society. We just got to brace for it. Um,
Yep.
Okay, listen, David, we obviously need to keep talking. This setting us up for another conversation down the pipe, I feel. But wonderful having sharing some time with you and just knocking a few ideas around. I hope you've got value from the chat, David. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you soon. But thank you so much for spending time with us. It's been a real pleasure, man.
Yeah, back at you. This was awesome. We definitely need to do more of this.
And that's it. David Wilkins, folks, a person you should be following on Brainfood Live, on air, of course, but also on LinkedIn. Obviously, an individual that is worth following. I'm going to try and do more of these one-to-one interviews. Let me know whether these things are interesting. I do sort of panels are still going to be the traditional way, but let me know whether there's enough within this the one-to-one type style that makes you feel okay. Maybe it should be a more regular thing. Maybe it's another show in the middle of the week. I don't know. Perhaps another format. You let me know. All right, that's about it. We are back. Actually, next week is a double header, folks. We have a double header next week because there can't be enough Brain Food Live, can there? On Wednesday, we are welcoming our good friend Daniel Chait. He's going to be talking to us about candidate fraud, how to harden the hiring funnel with infosec techniques. Super, super important. And then we have on Friday, 1st of August, humans required critical moments in the hiring process. Here's where we're talking about the human premium again. What do we know about the human being? When do they need to triage and come into a hyper efficient process? That's what we'll be talking about 1st of August. All right, folks, that's about it. If you enjoy this chat, follow me on LinkedIn or follow the channel on Crowdcast. Thanks for watching and have a good weekend, everyone.